another episode of People, Place, and Purpose, the show where we hear stories from business owners, creators, and entrepreneurs about how they got started, what they love most, what challenges them, where they've had to pivot, learn, change, how relationships and networking have helped along the way, and ultimately, how they turn their passion into a successful venture and are living a life they love. I'm your host, Kate Lusko. I love to travel, eat delicious food, and meet and get to know cool people, and I'm so glad you're here today. Let's jump in. Amy McCoy is the creative director, illustrator, and founder of Tiny Farmhouse, based in southeastern Massachusetts, right near the Rhode Island border. She spent her career as a freelance broadcast producer, but loves being an artist, traveling, growing her own food and raising animals, spending time in nature, and thinking about sustainability. In this episode, she references numerous times how she wants her uniquely designed tea towels, aprons, greeting cards, notebooks, market totes, and more to make people happy. With that, let's get to today's episode. So welcome. It's so nice to see you, Amy. Thank you for joining us today.
Kate, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this is a fun story. You are friends with a previous guest, which I was just saying to someone recently, how I feel like when you get kind of word of mouth referred by a good person, it naturally means it's another good person. So this is very exciting.
I mean, if Karen vouches for me, you know what I mean? Like she's like one of the best. So I feel like, yeah, so you can't do much better than that. So thank you. Yeah.
So start off, tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from and what has your life looked like from, those childhood career goals to where you are now?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm from Attleboro, Massachusetts, and I live like 4 miles from my mother's house right now in Rehoboth, Massachusetts. And I had, when I was a kid, like I would do drawings and I drew all the time. Like I was always making something. And when I was 5, I went door to door and I was selling my little paintings for a dime each. So I was already like in this, like, I'm going to make my artwork and I'm going to sell it. And so I was doing that. And then, I would do like the decorations for the classrooms. Like I would be the person to do the drawings that they put up around the walls and whatnot. And then like when it came time to go to college, I was the first person in my immediate family to go to college. And so my parents were a little freaked out by this like art school. What? So instead I went to school for television, radio, film production, which is really not that much different than going to school for art school.
Still very creative.
It's very creative, but it is different, but it wasn't, it's still like the same sort of challenges, I think, that you face as an art student, you face as a television or film student, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate. I did come out of school and I got work in my field. I actually still am a producer. I'm a video producer. I've worked in broadcast promotion for most of my career, doing a lot of work for cable networks and such. A&E was a big client for a long time. Discovery, I've done a ton of work with. History, I've done some work for ESPN. I've done some work with Sesame Street. I've done a lot PBS. I've done a lot of like fun, cool jobs. Like I worked on Shark Week as one of my first big jobs when I first got in the business, and I worked on Planet Earth promos when that first came out. So this is dating me a little bit.
Very cool though.
It was, and they were really fun projects and I really enjoyed them. And I learned a ton really from the people that I worked with in production at that point in time. It was the craft was really, really important at that point in time. And so I learned how to do things the right way, but also like client presentations, which does down the line come to help me in what I'm doing now. But client presentations, how to think through a creative problem, all of those things were really ingrained in that. So it was a good lesson. But even right when I first started producing and I knew that like, okay, well, this is working and I enjoy it, but I was like, I miss my artwork. Like I miss doing that. So I started taking classes at RISD Continuing Ed. So that's Rhode Island School of Design Continuing Ed for anyone who might not know the RISD thing. But so I took classes there I've taken classes there for a really long time. So from the time I was like 26 years old until just recently, like before the pandemic, I started out taking foundation classes. So I would take color theory and I was taking basic drawing and I was taking painting classes, and I took some classes on weekends I probably shouldn't have because I was still in my 20s and I couldn't always make it to the Saturday classes. But anyway, I took a ton of classes. And then from that, I started doing paper making, which is an interesting for, you know, an interesting path to get to where I am now. So I took paper making, and I took this intensive workshop on Martha's Vineyard one summer, and I learned about Polaroid transfers. And I was like, oh, Polaroid transfers, it sort of combined the, like some of the video things I really liked. Like I had studied film history in school. So I really was into sort of these like grainy looking things, but pretty, and, you know, beautiful composition, sort of graphic. And so I started doing that. And I licensed some of that work, the Polaroid transfers. I taught some hand paper making, but I was still being a producer the whole time. Like I was still doing production. And production is also very challenging. Like you can be, I mean, you're doing a podcast, you know, like there's all the post-production. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. And then there's the thing. And then there's all the post-production. And so, but I was doing all that and like managing shoots or managing big projects. And then from there, I started actually during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, things really dropped off for production work. A lot of like A&E, for instance, was like, we have to bring a lot of our work in-house. So there wasn't really room. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I read that you're a freelance producer. Is that sort of the norm for people in that world, that you kind of don't work for a company?
There's it's pretty 50-50, I would say. Like there's a whole cohort of freelance producers and all sorts of freelance production help, right? So everyone from the director of photography to the production assistant, right? So you have all these people that are working just on contract basis or just on a project. And then you have people like, you know, at a company where they're an agency or they're a small production company, and they have a certain number of staff people that keep the thing running, right, all the time. But then when things get busy, then they have to expand out, and they bring in this pool of freelancers. So yeah, so as a freelancer, like I have most of my friends are freelance producers. I have some friends that are on staff, but you know, there's a whole group of us that have been working as freelance producers for more than 20 years. So it makes it difficult though when when all of a sudden there's not any work, because you rely on your savings, and then there's no unemployment because you're technically self-employed, right? So in 2008, 2009, there was no work, and I knew there was no work coming, and it was like going to be months and months and months. And it sort of got to the point where I was like, okay, this is really getting a little dicey. And I was like, well, how can I sort of cut back on our budget? And I was like, oh, you know what, I'm going to cut back on food and let me figure out how we can do this. And we have a garden, so we grow a bunch of our own food. And, you know, I'd always been cooking. My grandmother had an Italian restaurant in Rhode Island. So like there's a big history of food and, you know, food love in our family. So I started a food blog. Now might sound like sort of out of left field, but all the time I was taking these art classes, I also was taking some writing classes here and there. And I had taken this writing class at Grub Street in Boston for food writing. And this was like right around the Julia and Julie thing, like when that blog really hit, it was really big. And one of the instructors was like, oh, you know, if you start a food blog, you could try to do something like this or whatever. So I was like, well, you know, I'm going to try starting a food blog. I'm here at home. I have to have a project. I'm a project-based person, right? So I started this food blog, and, you know, I would test my recipes, and I would take the photography, and I'd do all the pictures, and then I would post my posts, and I would promote it on Twitter, because that was like, Twitter was the thing, right? So I promoted it on Twitter, and I started gaining a following. And then I started networking about it, and I was like, well, I need to get more people, you know, more eyes on my blog. And pretty quickly, I wound up getting some interest from a literary agent, because the concept was budget food, and the name of it was Poor Girl Gourmet. And so, you know, it was, and also a lot of people were stressed out at that point in time, because a lot of people were not doing, you know, things were not going well in the economy. So they were like, could you do a proposal? And I was like, yeah, I can do a proposal. I'm like, I got another project. So I did the proposal, and it actually wound up getting bid on by 3 different publishers, and wound up publishing with Andrews McMeel, which they are fabulous. I loved working with them. And the book came out, and this is 2010. So, you know, we're 12 years ago now. But it was really fun, and I met tons of great people through food blogging and through having the book, like other authors. Like it just was really a fantastic experience. And then I went back to work as a producer, because like, all right, here I am producing. And I still continued food writing, and I had actually during that period had sort of moved away from doing artwork. Like the photography was sort of a stand-in, but it wasn't artwork. You know, I wasn't doing things with my hands as much. The cooking was the thing with my hands. And I was like, oh, I'm really missing the artwork part of this. So I was like, and I was also a little torn, because I had just done this whole book thing, and I was like, well, this isn't totally a career. Like I enjoy this, but it's not enough to like have a foundation of like, I can have my life the way I want my life to be, income wise. So I did this class, online class called Do What You Love. And this was in 2015. And so I don't know if you've heard of it, but Beth Kempton runs it. And so I took the class and it was like really like a deep dive into like, well, what do you want to be doing? Because I'm like, well, I'm kind of like, producing is fun, but as you get older, like, 14-hour shoot days, things like that, not that much fun anymore. So, and I also really wanted my own thing. So I was like, what can I do? So I did all this, inner excavation. And then I was like, okay, well, I want to get back to doing artwork. So I started out taking classes. I started back at RISD. I started back with some online classes as well. And some of them I was truly just terrible at. Like some of my work was like the worst in the entire class. I was like, wow, I have a long way to go. Like I'm so out of practice.
I feel like I appreciate hearing that as someone. I studied abroad. I studied in Italy. We talked about that in college. And because my degree was a Bachelor of Arts, we had to take a language and we had to take some sort of art class. And so I took a drawing class there. I sort of saved it for when I went there. And I feel like I'm just not, I used to be musically talented. I'm just artistically, it's just not my strength, but I always assume that people who are artistically inclined can just do it. And so it's interesting to hear you say that it doesn't necessarily mean that all of it comes easily just because you're inclined that way.
No, and you get rusty and you get, I mean, I have friends, you do. I mean, it's not like riding a bike exactly. Like, you've got it in there, but then also like, I think you've been speaking to a lot of creative people and everyone sort of has that self-doubt, right? Like, so if it's terrible the first time that you do it, you might run away. Like you might not want to go back and do it again, right? You're like, oh, I'm really way worse than I thought I was. I'm actually terrible at this. I'm never going to be good. Like you get very fatalistic. There's a lot of like negative self-talk that goes on when you're trying to make something. It's that Ira Glass episode of This American Life where you have this ideal, like this is the idea what I have and it should be at this level, but what you're making is down here at this level. And you're trying to bridge that gap and it makes you upset that you're not at the level that you really want to be at. Like your taste gap is beyond where you are able to actually make the work. But the practice is right how you get up at least close to where you want to be on your taste, your taste level. Because it's difficult, right? To ever really attain the ideal, right? That ideal is always going to be somewhere off in the distance. I mean, if you're trying to grow, right, as an artist, but I think my work was honestly, truly, it was just bad. Like I was not skilled like the other people in the class were. Like the work isn't a lot different than what I'm doing now. It's just that my execution was like not quite there. So it was really like, again, it's just the practice. It's like, I mean, when you exercise, like you start out and you're like, oh, this is dreadful. I'm terrible at this. Like I'm dying here, and then a few months go by and you're like, hey, all right, I'm making progress. So it's the same thing. You got to do the practice. Like you just have to put the work in. And I don't even honestly know why. Well, I think I do. I think it was because I really wanted to be making art again. And I wanted to make it at that level, at that higher level. And because it was a little discouraging. I'm not going to say that there were not tears. Like there have been tears multiple times in this course of getting to this point, because I've looked at the work and I've been like, this is just not what I want it to be. And then I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? So I kept taking these classes and I started to improve. And like 2 years later, I took a class that was called the Ultimate Portfolio Builder. And I wound up winning, like there was a prize in the end that was like, like basically the best in the class, like the person that had the nicest collection in the class. So there were two of us who won this little prize. But that was a huge ego boost. Like that was a huge like, oh, somebody who was doing this professionally thought my work was good enough, even if I wasn't even sure that I could replicate that same work again.
The really validation. Wasn't. Yeah.
Right. And even it still took probably another year or two before I was like, okay, I can actually do this work and I can do it again. Like if I want to do it again, I can make something that good again. And I might even get better if I keep going. So, and that's sort of where I went with all of the artwork. And then I came to a point where I had an instructor at RISD who was a mentor and still is a mentor to me. And she had said at one point we were in a critique and she looked at me and she's like, okay, you're ready. What are you going to do with your work now? And I was like, I'm ready. What does this mean?
No pressure.
I was like, I'm just taking classes. I'm going to be a perpetual student. Why are you putting pressure on me? But anyway, those words, like I was like, okay, well, if she thinks so, and she's an instructor at RISD and she's a professional in this field, I obviously I need to start doing something. So I went to the Center for Women in Enterprise. They have different chapters around New England. And I went to them and I started doing the business classes, and I was like, okay, I'm learning about how to start a business. And it was really helpful. I mean, it was really because I'd been producing, but you're very project-based. You're not very big picture-based, right? So I took all that information I got at the CWE, and I was like, well, I have to start this sort of bootstrapped. I was like, well, what can I do? So I knew I wanted to do something with decor, and I knew eventually I'd want to do something with stationery, and I love tea towels. And so the first thing I was like, I'm going to do tea towels. So I started these tea towels, and I found a vendor in the UK, and they did everything eco-friendly, and and the colors were beautiful, and the fabric's really nice. And I had a studio sale here in my studio, and I sold 50 of one design, this chicken design that I have. So I sold 50 of that tea towel in this one sale, and I was like, what is happening? I just invited my friends over, and all of a sudden all this stuff had sold. So it was pretty amazing. And I was like, oh, okay, so I think I can do this. And then from there, I really wanted to expand it into making sure that everything was eco-friendly. I had little forays where I was like, oh, I could do this sort of little, like a pocket mirror or something. But I'm like, but that's not very, is anybody going to use that after the first maybe couple months, or is it going to be good enough, or is it just going to wind up in a trash pile? And I didn't want things, I wanted things to be useful. And I know a mirror is useful, but I was really want things to be a little more thoughtful and useful. So I started sourcing paper. So I was doing notebooks also in the UK, and that was all in recycled paper, but they just weren't quite as nice as I would have liked them to have been. They were perfectly fine, but I just, again, the eyeglass, trying to get them up here. So yeah, during COVID, when everything was locked down, I spent a lot of time working on sourcing. And then I finally have gotten to the point where now I feel like my cards are all printed on hemp paper, and they're really the paper is so nice, and it just makes me so excited. One of my friends was like, your designs are on them, because I'm on and on about the paper. Paper is so nice. It's so thick and wonderful. And she's like, and your designs are on them and they're cute. And I'm like, okay, thanks.
Self-promotion.
Yeah, right. I'm not the best at that, but anyway, so I managed to get everything to where I'm really happy with the products, and that in turn makes me feel a lot more confident about marketing them. Plus, I'm more confident in my art skills than I was, in 2015. So that also makes it easier to now go out and be like, oh, I can do illustration for a corporation, or I can do illustration for a magazine, that sort of thing. So
it's so fascinating to me. It makes sense hearing you say it, but I've always assumed that artists, it just came naturally, the thought of practicing. And again, I feel a little silly because, as a former musician, I didn't just know how to do it just because I had the inclination. It's just fascinating to me that, you sort of had to practice to get better and sort of learn different skills are there things that you discovered along the way, different mediums or something that maybe you really enjoyed, but just didn't, to your point earlier, it didn't matter maybe how much practice you had, it just wasn't going to turn out the way you wanted?
Yes. So I do still play around a lot. I try really hard, I try to make sure I'm playing around, but some of it comes down to finding the right brushes. And sometimes I would try to work big, and I do I would take painting classes and I would work big if I were doing a landscape. And I love that. And I would do that in oil, right? And but that's different than what I'm doing. Illustration to me is tiny and cute. A lot of my inspiration comes from when I was a kid, Sandra Boynton's work. I just love that kind of adorable, sweet work. And I have a different, I do have a different style. It's a little more, I guess, more realistic, in a way than the super cute stuff. But I really wanted to focus on making stuff that was cute, that made people smile, that made people feel like this is a little different, and it makes me it's a little quirky, but it makes me smile when I look at it. I did have a friend of mine who she's a great painter, and she's down in Charleston, South Carolina. Her name is Afra Gibbs, and she does a lot of plant paintings, and she does a lot of dog portraits. And I was down in Charleston, and we met up, and I was talking to her, and I'm like, sometimes I'm struggling with my watercolors. And she's like, oh, sweetie. She was like, you need to use gouache. And I was like, gouache? What? And so gouache is opaque, so you can actually make layers in a way that you cannot do with watercolor. And sometimes I still love the look of watercolor. So sometimes I will use watercolor, and sometimes I'll use gouache, and sometimes I mix the two together because they're both water-based and you can. But yeah, it's like sort of experimenting, finding those new tools. I just got some new Posca markers, which is like a little inside baseball, but like they're fine tip pens. And I had been in a draw along, they call it the Illustrator's circle, which is they draw and cook and they draw and travel. They do these little draw alongs, and they're like really awesome. They're super fun, and they're an hour, and you just sit, and somebody who is an accomplished illustrator sits and like talks about their process. And they did one a couple weeks ago with Terry Runyon, who focuses a lot on cats. They were really adorable. But she was like, and I just love these Posca pens right now, and they're really fine tip. And I'm like, oh, that could help me when I can't use, like I have a really tiny brush that I do detail work with. I was like, oh, Posca pens could help me out. So those just came in. I'll be playing with those. So I think a lot of artists are always playing with like material and trying to figure out, what can you get out of it, even if it doesn't work in your actual work that you're going to put out. Like, what can you learn from it that might help you apply it to what you would normally do?
Or combine things together, it sounds like, to sort of use the best of different worlds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like you're always learning and exploring,
Yeah, which I mean means you love it, right? Like if it were sort of a chore, you wouldn't be playing around and trying new things, right? Like I think that, and if we're not doing something that we love, what are we doing? So
exactly.
But the business side of things, like how hard was that part, right? To sort of, get those pieces. I would imagine you wrote a business plan and, opened bank accounts and found people to help on the finance. Like how did all of that go?
So actually, this is very embarrassing, but I have still not written my business plan out fully. Like I have an idea of what I'm doing, but it is not, and I have a draft, but it is not fully done. And I'm 4 years into it. So that's not good. Like this year, I'm like, this is the year I do the business plan for real. So
but I also feel like there are traditional rules around these things, but I've had people say to me, like, it's for your benefit, unless you're going to get traditional funding and they're requiring it. It's really, I think it helps you sort out some things and maybe get clear about what you're doing, which if you're either still figuring that out or you are already clear, one could argue. I don't think it's right or wrong, just helpful if it's helpful.
I agree. And I do think it is helpful. Like I do. And one of the reasons actually I intend to do it this year is because I do intend to at least be going for grants. Whether I get them or not, is to be seen, but it's worth trying, right? To see like, oh, could I get enough money to do this particular product that I would prefer not to bootstrap? So I have been basically bootstrapping this all along, which is, maybe not the most ideal scenario, but it's fine. And I have learned to work within it. And I've had, I do well enough at sales. I can put money back into the business. I can take some money out. Like when I'm doing markets, that all works out. But it's been interesting, like, okay, well, I've sold this many tea towels. Okay, so I have this much money I can put towards more inventory. I can put this towards income, or I can put this toward, education or whatever it needs to be, taxes, obviously. So like all of these things that you're like moving that money around, but I am still working, I do still work as a producer and I'm freelance. So that's helpful because I can be like, okay, well, during December, I can't work as a producer because I'm going to be doing markets and that's going to be a busy time. Or, I can't work these particular days because I'm going to be doing this market. And at some point, hopefully soon, I will be able to transition all the way over to where I'm like, okay, and that's actually probably another good reason to have a business plan. Like it's time to really do this, like to really figure out, and some of it is, to go on a tangent, some of it is a little bit of like, there's product, but then there's also illustration that I'm doing for projects, right? So I'm still like, there's still a project piece. So if I'm doing work for someone, like that's gonna be part of the income stream, and then the product sales are gonna be part of the income stream. And I do need to figure that out, like, how do I want to balance that? When is the time of year that I can do projects? Because I wouldn't be able to do them when it's busier at the end of the year.
Right.
So yeah, I think this is the year for the business plan.
I would imagine it's helpful. Back when I was in the nonprofit sector, there's something people call mission creep, right? When you sort of, maybe there's a grant that comes up and it's really appealing. It's a little outside of what you're doing, but could you kind of make it? And so I think it can be helpful because I would imagine doing what you're doing. I mean, you could do custom work, you could do classes, you could do, you talked about sort of like bringing people together to work alongside. I mean, like there's so many things that people will say you can't be everything to everyone. And so I would imagine that having something that kind of keeps bringing you back to your why or your what or your ultimate goals or phases, maybe something that kind of keeps it, a little bit more compartmentalized.
Absolutely. And like, I have done all the work on the, what is your why? And, what is my North Star and what is the purpose of this business? And I've done, who are the people that are interested in what I'm doing? I've done all of that. It's just I haven't really gotten to the point where I'm like, I think it's also like part of like, what is it what's it you as the founder are bringing? And I'm like, I make the drawings. It's not just that, of course. I mean, there's the environmental impact, the usefulness part of it, right? Like I want everything to be eco-friendly. I want it to make people happy. I want people to feel happy when they look at the work. Like that's the whole point of the work that I'm doing. And then I think also from my experience in working in so many different places, whenever I do have somebody else to work with me, I want to make sure that work is not the only thing, because I think that's the thing in production, is that everyone expects you to just only do that and be very focused and be available all the time. And I think, we want to have lives.
For sure. Well, and I want to pull upon something you said with sustainability, and you talked a little bit about, hydropower, the quality of materials, living wages. Can you talk about kind of what brought you to sustainability and then how that translates in a little bit more detail into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have actually always been interested in sustainability, like since I was a kid. So my mother had a food co-op in our house, and that was sort of a hippy dippy thing to do. Like it was in our garage. And I think maybe like that early influence of seeing all these women get together and talk about like, the fruits and vegetables that they were getting and where they were coming from. And then when I was in middle school, I did a science fair project on solar power, and I had actually made a little plywood house and it had solar power. And we had a friend of the family that had solar power, and I was so jealous. I really so badly wanted solar power when I was a kid. I finally have solar power. My studio, the house is all powered by solar power, but and it took until like 2017 or something to get solar power. And I was like, finally, my dream is coming true.
It's so funny the things we latch onto as kids that when you look back on them, it makes you wonder, like, why did a kid really have a concern or a want for that? But that's pretty cool.
It is super interesting, but like I think like you, like I like to be outdoors. I like to enjoy my garden. I love the beach. I love the ocean. I am very freaked out currently about sea level rise and what's going to happen to all my favorite places. It's upsetting, right? So I also just feel like sometimes I do wonder, like, why am I making things? Like, why am I bringing things into the world? Is there not something else I could do that would be not like a thing, using resources? And I'm like, okay, so, and that's a conflict, quite honestly, for me. But in the meantime, while I'm trying to make things that I enjoy making and that I want people to enjoy, I also want to make sure that they're doing the very least damage that they can do, because I think we're at critical mass right now. I think we're at the point where everyone really needs to be, and by this I mean like larger corporations than me and my small business need to be really thinking like, what is it that I'm doing to help the planet and not have the temperature rise more than 1.5 degrees, which of course is like still catastrophic for a lot of places, right? So and that's part of like when I was like, well, I could make like little tchotchke things, and I'm not, anyone who's doing that, that's totally cool. But for me, I was just like, I just don't feel good about that for myself. Like that doesn't make me feel good about like, so I'm making some money because, I made these things that people were more likely to buy at a lower price point, but are they going to use them and are they just going to wind up in a landfill? And that just didn't feel right to me. So I really did like a lot of research. Like, I found there's a printer I'm working with in Maine. They use wind power. They were great about getting me, like, I was like, it's very important to me that everything be eco-friendly. And they're like, you are clear. We are clear on that. And then the envelopes are from this mill that uses hydropower and has been for almost 100 years.
Wow.
You know, and my vendor in the UK, and I have been trying to find someone in the US to do this, but I haven't had the success that I was hoping to have with that yet. I'm still confident that it will happen eventually, but the guy I'm working with pays a living wage. They actually have an accreditation there, like that's an actual thing that they do there, which I feel like we should be doing that here and everywhere. They reach is this certification. It's a law in the EU that they don't use any products that use any unnecessary chemicals, or they don't use child labor. So, you know, there are all these rules that go into it that make me feel better about the product I'm getting from him. They don't throw anything into landfill. Everything gets recycled in some way. They use low water. They're not using a ton of water. They're not getting a bunch of suds out of their dyes when they're putting through, you know, when they're dyeing things. So to me, it's just like, that's the way to go for me. It makes me feel better. It makes me feel better about selling things. It just, and you know, and I'm hoping that they are durable and that they last for people, or that they, you know, that they're durable and they're like putting a smile on their face as well.
Yeah.
So
2 side notes. I think our moms would be the best of friends. My mom often talks about back in the 70s, she lived on Long Island in New York and was part of the natural food movement before it was really a thing. And so I think
yes,
there would be some commonalities there.
absolutely.
But the other piece to your point about sort of more stuff, there's a company that I follow called One Canoe 2. I don't know if you've heard of them, sort of larger
No.
scale. But every month I go on, they actually send it to email subscribers, but a free digital wallpaper. And I love them. This month's is like these whimsical, it's a bunch of different birds and bright colors, and it changes
fun.
up once a month. There's like a little calendar on one section of the wallpaper, but that, you know, I know you have some free downloads on your website for digital things, but you know, there are ways to sort of balance the two, I'm sure.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think about that a lot. And like, what could I do that's more downloadable? Also, another thing is like trying to work in small batches. So I'm not trying to have a ton of stock in, you know, in-house at all times. I'm trying to keep it to a small amount so that I'm not wasting things. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to sell these and then I will get more. I mean, it helps because it's bootstrapping, but also I think, you know, I'm not getting things I don't need or that people aren't going to want, you know. But I agree with you. I definitely think about digital product and what that would look like. And I do have a ton of free downloads on my site. Like at the beginning of COVID, I was like feeling obviously very sad like everyone else. And I was like, well, what can I do that like people might, you know, they might cheer people up from afar. And those, the free downloads, like that's really fun because everyone, you know, like every day there's people downloading things. I'm like, oh, what did this person get? Oh, this person.
So Tiny Farmhouse, clearly there's a story. I mean, I loved reading the story on your website about you and your husband, but for those who haven't visited the website yet, tell us the story of where the name came to be and, you know, what that part of your life has looked like.
Yeah, so my husband and I met when I was a bartender, actually, and he was golfing at the golf course where I was a bartender, and he actually already owned this house. So the house that we're in really does look like a kindergartner drew it. It's got the little, you know, it's just squared off, a little peak roof, and it's small. I mean, this is again like it's a tiny farmhouse, and they're just the two of us, and it's really only appropriate for two people. Like it's a 2-person house. But he has like we now together have like about 1.5 acres of land. We have chickens. We have a big garden. We actually started a flower garden in our corral. At one time we had cows, then we got rid of the cows and we had pigs. We decided that that was a lot of work and they're smelly. So then we did away with the pigs, and now we're down to bees and chickens and our dog. But we put a dahlia, basically a cutting garden, mostly dahlias in the corral, and that is super fun. So yeah, we're just in this like adorable little house. I mean, it's cute and it needs, you know, it needs work here and there. We're like, oh, well, that's like all houses. But it's a cute little house and we're happy in it, and we're happy, you know, we have the outdoors. It's just nice to be able to garden here and be outside. So, and then we have the solar panels, which makes me so happy.
That's amazing. Bees are on my bucket list. Probably not. I live in, sort of in the city, but I don't have enough land, but I think that would be so gratifying.
You could do it though, because they fly like a 5-mile radius. So they would fly from your house. You just need to put them where they're not going to be in a traffic spot, like where you're not walking by them all the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I
You
think
might be able to sneak them in. Might be able to sneak them in.
Well, I don't think there's any rules around bees like there are, right? Some towns, chickens and different things have rules, but I don't think bees, I wouldn't imagine. And we certainly need more of them. I just saw these really neat, just as an aside, bee cups. So they sort of look like a pencil with a little tiny bowl. They're made out of ceramic, and people display them together, different colors and different configurations, and they fill up with water overnight, and then so that the bees have water to drink. But then by the end of the day, when it would be mosquito time, the water will have evaporated. And I just thought it was such a neat, to your point, kind of super practical and yet beautiful and artistic and creative. Yes. And people amaze me. There's so many cool things out there.
That is super cool. Like I will have to look into those, because we also have a lot of bumblebees here. Like we have a whole bumblebee situation going on here, which is great because they're also endangered, Yeah.
So talk about your products. What are all the things? I'm a little bit notebook obsessed, so I did check out the notebooks, but you have lots of things.
Yeah. So I started with the tea towels, and I expanded the tea towels to then aprons. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do aprons. And then I decided I would do tote bags. So I have some market totes. I have this, my dream is to do actual accessories though. So I want to do like a tote bag that's a little more fashion tote bag than a market tote, and little zipper pouches. So those are hopefully coming soon. And then I started working on cards. I was like, okay, well, I have again, the Sandra Boynton thing. I've always been sort of obsessed with cards. I'm obsessed with paper anyway. Like it's just I made paper, I made handmade paper. I'm into paper. So I started doing the cards, and then from there I was like, okay, I'd start doing the notebooks. And the notebooks, like right now, I'm super excited about them because they're a little thicker. They're like 64 pages. A lot of people have like 48-page notebooks. I was selling them at the Boston Public Market at the holidays, and it was just like a trial run, see how they did. And this one woman came up and she's like, look, I use fountain pens. I'm not sure if I could, I need to know what the paper is like. And I'm like, it's really nice paper. And we opened one up and she was like, oh, it's really nice paper.
There's nothing worse than a notebook you have to use a pencil on, because otherwise you can't write on the back of the page.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was really great. I was like, yay, fountain pen writers like my notebook. So actually, I'm just right now having a print run done of them. I just sent in my files, so they're being redone. And those will be back out in like 2 weeks. And that's exciting. So I'm excited to get those. That's the next step, is to take those and start doing wholesale with those. And then I have all the digital downloads, right? So like a bunch of coloring sheets for adults and for children, and free downloadable cards. I figured like that was, especially at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, there's a thinking of you card. There was a You Rock card for people, like, figured people might be expressing some gratitude. And then there was a birthday card that people could download for free. And those designs are still in the paper line, but they're available online as well. Yeah, so, and I have face masks, but we're going to try to tap that down a little bit.
Face them out a little bit. So you mentioned wholesale. Is that, I would imagine going forward, there's some sort of balance between kind of retail or somehow direct versus wholesale. How do you figure out what that looks like?
So that's really interesting, because I don't have a business plan, but I did do a giant spreadsheet.
I do love spreadsheets. They're super helpful.
They really are. So I did a giant spreadsheet, and I was like, okay, this is what this looks like, to sell this many direct to consumer and to sell this many wholesale. And, it does all, the numbers all work, but there'll be a mix, there'll definitely be a mix. And I think I had started doing some wholesale before the pandemic, and it was good. But I also think maybe I wasn't totally ready for it at the time when I started. It was like 2018 or so. And I think I was not quite all the way there with my product. Like my product wasn't all the way where I wanted it to be. And now where I feel like it is where I want it to be, I feel like it will go better. But like for me, like I personally will feel better about it, where I was like, yep, okay, well, hopefully they like these, now I'm like, no, these are nice. So these are good quality. I do have a few wholesale outlets, but not a ton right now. So that is like the next step is to start building that up and going. And I've had recommendations because I've been at the Boston Public Market a bit. And so I've had people there who have been recommending shops that they like. They're like, oh, you should go to this shop. Your work should be in this shop. So I'll be doing that first. And then there are some of the online, I do have a website, as you mentioned. So I have the website, but then there's things like Fair, where you can wholesale. So I'll probably start doing that as well. But I would like to establish a little bit more of a local base of shops that I have a personal relationship with, and then work toward the fairs of, that situation. So I think it would be good just to have like good relationships with people locally that I'm working with, and see what they think of the line and see what suggestions they have too.
Okay, so as you're talking, I can't help but be almost a little overwhelmed. Like, how would you, especially as you start to transition, think about at some point transitioning to doing this full time, how do you balance, being the one to be the creator, right? Coming up with the actual artwork, what the products are, sourcing the products, where you're going to sell them, making the wholesale accounts. Like, how do you decide on Mondays I do this, and on Tuesday, how do you make all of those pieces work?
I do actually normally do a schedule for myself because I'm a producer.
Which is great. I mean, I'd love to see the transferability of those skill sets. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, it does help. It really does help, but it is a lot. I'm not gonna, it is definitely a lot. So it's okay. Like, I have a giant list. I think it was it Shauna that from Wildcraft Co. was saying that she has a giant list of things to make, and I have a giant list of things to make, giant. And then I'm like, oh, but I actually need to make sure that these are getting printed now. And okay, well, I need to actually do my my biweekly email now. And so you are like trying to juggle all of those things. And that's where like that conversation about, how many custom jobs can I take on and at what point in the year? Because I can't take them on all year. I don't have time. Like I can't. And then, yeah, so it is a lot. And I do all of the photography, like all of the shots for the website I did myself, like, so it's been a bit. I like it. I mean, I'm glad, like, I think it was Chelsea, right, from Queen City Cupcakes was saying, like, you gotta know how to do everything, right? So I feel like I do know how to do all of the things that are required in my job and in my business. And then when it comes time, when I can transfer some of that, I will at least know exactly what that person needs to do. And at some point, hopefully soon, I will be able to get somebody else on to help with some of the things like, okay, here's the estimate for this print run. What, is this number good? And when is it coming in? And, maybe I don't have to be the one to traffic like the questions about the budget or, booking the markets, or, I mean, not that that's that big of a deal, but like you're saying, there's just so many little details. So
well,
yeah,
it's not, it's the juggling, but it's also, there's no right answer. I'm sure to some extent you have to sort of trial and error and figure out, like you commented how, I can't do custom orders during this time of year. I mean, to some extent, maybe you have to kind of make those mistakes, if you will, to then learn like, oh, hey, not maybe the best idea going forward.
Yeah, and I have. Oh, and I have made those mistakes. So, and that's how you learn, right? And you're like, oh no, I can do this. And then all of a sudden it's like, why would I ever have taken this on at this point in time? This is a silly idea. Very silly. So
and hopefully you remember the next time.
Exactly. I have started making notes, and this is actually something I even do for travel. Like if I overpacked, this is like, so I do make notes, like on my calendar, I will make a note, like, do not pack, da 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 da, and I'll like make a note, do not take any more jobs after this point. Like I put it on the calendar, and hopefully I see the notification, I remember it, and I'm like, okay, that's right, that was bad.
Well, so I really want to hear more about the actual designs. I know you talked a little bit about your influence, but how do you decide you want to create a new design and what colors to use? What does that creative process look like?
Yeah, so the color thing is really interesting because I found at the very beginning of like feeling like I knew what I was doing finally, I already had a very set palette, and it's very pastel-y basically, right? So it's like happy colors but pastel, right? And I have a whole little document that I made that this is the palette for Tiny Farmhouse. So there is a little palette document that I can go in anytime. Normally I'm painting, but if I'm if I'm coloring something in the computer, I pull that document up and I like go and I grab the colors and I use those swatches for my painting things in the computer. But normally it's something that like I'm drawn to, right? So I'm not really influenced by trends so much as I am by like what I like and what is in my, like I do want to do things that people want to buy, right? So it can't just all be about me and what I like. But it's like, okay, you know, I was like, oh, I want to do something fun with dogs. So because I love my dog and she's my baby, you know, and I'm like, all right, so I'm going to do something fun with dogs. And so I did the illustrations of dogs and I made that into a card. I made it initially actually into an animation. And then I made it into, I was like, oh, why don't I do this as a card? Like I did a Yappy Valentine's animation. I was like, why didn't I make this into a card? Sometimes the most obvious things are not obvious to me too. Like, I think that's where I could benefit from another person working with me. Like, why is this not already on something? I was like, I don't know. I just made it into an animation. I thought it was cute. And then I was like, oh, wait, I have all this art that like would be fun to have as a card. And that's a really, like, I did it as Yappy Birthday. And that's a really good selling card for me. So it's funny. And then some things are like just directly from my garden. Like, okay, I was in the garden and I was looking at my radishes and my peas and I did some sketches and then I made a pattern from the, you know, French breakfast radish. Or I was traveling or I was missing travel. And I was like, oh, you know what? Lemons remind me of being in Italy and let me paint some lemons. Or like, oh, how about all that beautiful tile that you see? Because Italy, of course, like we have in common. Italy is like one of my favorite places and I was very much missing it. So I want to make a pattern that's all like, feels like, you know, Italian tile. Or I just did this one design that actually came from, I was doing one of these draw-alongs from They Draw and Cook. And I made a tube of tomato paste. And then I was like, oh, this is really fun. I mean, this is like how arbitrary it is sometimes that like, this is the way things get made. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I should do a tomato can. So I did a tomato can. And I was like, oh, this is, I'm really enjoying doing these like food label type things. And I made that into a card and a tea towel. The tea towel hasn't been released yet, but the card I had, I've just recently launched and it's, I love you more than red sauce.
I saw that. I thought that was fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks. And people were really into it. Like people were like, oh, this is so fun. I'm like, it's a little quirky, but it's, you know, it's where I'm coming from. And like the chickens, obviously, like we have chickens. So I was like, and the chicken design actually came after I'd had a complete meltdown the day before. I had done a design and it was terrible, or I thought it was terrible. And well, I thought it was okay, but I brought it to a class critique and it was like, there was sort of like quizzical, like not understanding what was going on with the design. And I'm like, you know what? I tried to force it. Like I tried to force something I really wasn't feeling. And then and I was upset because I was like, I'm spending all this time like trying to like force myself into some other category that I maybe don't want to be doing instead of just going over here and doing exactly what I want to do, like the way, or in my style. Like I was just trying to be like a little too similar to other people, I think, in a way, with the design that didn't get well received. And I was like, okay. And I came home and I spent a bunch of time working on these chicken designs. And that wound up being like my top seller, which was really funny because the day before I was like, I need to give this up. This is not working.
Well, and it's like, I know we were talking about, I just ran my first half marathon, and in the running world, there's that expression, run your own race. And so so much of that to me feels like it doesn't have to be what someone else is doing, or, I mean, right. Listening to your gut, following it's so funny how so often it's sort of those reminders come to us where it's like, oh, right. Yeah. I'm just supposed to do what I'm supposed to do.
Exactly. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, boy.
And secondly, it's like that basic, right? It's like really run your own race, do your own thing, be you. Yeah. You're enough, you know, and you can't compare yourself to other people. There's a quote that actually an instructor that I had would use all the time. It's like, don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle. And it's a good quote, right? But I was trying to do something that wasn't really me. So I do now, I'm better at this because I've been doing it longer. The practice is there, but I don't try to do something that is like someone else. I'm like, you can only do what you do. It's the only way you can do it. You can't try to do the way that someone else does it. It's not possible because it's upsetting.
Wow,
you know,
right.
It just stresses you out, really.
Well, I would imagine even if, and maybe not, but I would imagine even if it sort of got beyond you being okay with it, maybe it wouldn't sell as well because it wouldn't have that same authenticity and feel like it fit with the rest of what you're doing.
And that's another point that people do make all the time in art world, right? Is don't copy, because people want to buy you. They want to buy what you're doing. That's another instructor would always say, like, do what you do, because people will see your joy. This is this woman, Lila Rogers, who's an agent, but she runs a bunch of classes too. And that's one of her things, like, they will buy your joy. And it's true. Like, and I think, like, to say, like, I do sit down and I'm like, oh, I have a giant list of things to do, but I also just sort of let it flow. Once I will take the idea, like, if it's, I'm gonna do something with dogs, I'm just gonna paint dogs and see how, like, I'm not like, the dogs need to look like this. It's like, I just paint them and see what happens. And like, whatever are the best are the ones that are gonna get used. So there's plenty of stuff that doesn't make it. And that's again, like film, right? A lot of things on the cutting room floor. It's a bunch of stuff that's not good still. And I think, like, a lot of artists will say, like, they're all, artists with huge followings on Instagram. And they're like, please just know that, like, I did, 10 bad versions of this before I got to the thing that you're seeing on social media. And that is true. But I do just try to do my own thing and, like, get into it, like, just turn everything else off and do my thing. And if it comes out good, then great. And if it doesn't, then okay, that's an arc. And I do try to do, like, general themes. So, like, I will be working on a theme that's more coastal this year, and I'll be working on a theme that's more Italy this year. But it'll sort of just be whatever is the best of whatever I managed to come up with for those,
And so you talked about sort of having a giant list. You talked about getting into more like little pouches and things like that. What else is on your bucket list for this business?
So I think ultimately I do want to see this become more than just me in my studio. I would like to see it be, I don't think it needs to be huge, but I don't think it needs to be a big business, but I would like to have a few people who are working with me. I would like to have all of us. Part of it is to spread joy, right, to other people. Like, so, like, here's this fun, there are all these fun paper products and there are some fun accessories that you can get, and we can feel good about it because we're doing the best we can as far as eco-friendly goes. And as I learn things, I will make adjustments to make it better, whatever I can do in that way. And yeah, just really to, like, I do want to start getting into more stores, and I do want to have more reach for sure. So I don't want this to be like a one person going to markets business forever. I would like to see it grow and at least, be sustainable, and maybe even a little more than sustainable would be good. That's sort of vague, but that's, it's a hard one to answer with no business plan.
Well, and I would imagine so much of it just sort of happens, right? That, a new avenue or something that didn't exist before, or something you discover that you love that, maybe you want to spend more time focusing on instead of something else.
Yeah. And I do think there's a lot of that, like the good luck, but, like, you put yourself in the position, right? Because you're working toward getting the good luck in a way, right? So, and going out in the world, like, I think it was, it was Shauna, right, that was talking about doing markets. Yeah, when she was talking about, like, going out and doing markets and meeting other people, but that's also how you meet people who might want your work on a larger scale somewhere, so yeah, it is like those happy sort of, oh, hey, all of a sudden you've got this client that you didn't realize that you could even have, like, you didn't even know that they existed for you.
Well, and it sounds like you have no shortage of trying things, which I think is also right. You have to be willing to try and have it not work, or have it work with some tweaks, or such a big part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I love to ask everyone, what advice would you give for someone who's, maybe like you and sort of, still doing something as a side hustle, or has always dreamed of having their own whatever and hasn't yet done it? What words of wisdom would you impart?
I really think do not give up. Like, it can, and I think you have to understand it's going to be a roller coaster. Like, there are going to be days that you're like, this is great. Like, this is really working. I can see it. And there are going to be days where you're like, wow, this is kind of frustrating because you're doing all the work yourself, or you're not, I mean, there are definitely going to be challenges, but definitely stick with it. Like, if it's something you love and it lights you up and you're willing to experiment and try new things and, and find out, like, what is best for you and put all that work in, don't give up on it. Like, it will work out. And I do think I agree with that statement from Lila Rogers, that people will buy your joy. And I think that goes for whatever you're doing. Like, it doesn't have to be artwork. It can be, personal training. It can be, can be cupcakes, it can be anything, you know, it can really. So I think just stick with it.
Well, and it comes across, right? Our energy comes across when we're doing sort of the things where we're in the right place. So that certainly makes a difference too. I'm sure when you go to shows and you're, you know, displaying your wares for people, I'm sure they can feel the love and the care and the attention that went into everything.
I hope so. I really do hope so. I mean, because I'm there and I'm trying, you know, like I am excited to tell people about my work when they come to see me. I'm like, okay, this is really exciting. I can't wait to tell you about it. Like, you know, and it's obviously not the most important thing to them, but it is like one of the most important things to me. So I do think that comes across for sure.
So where can people find, and I want you to include all the things because the cookbook still exists, right? So where can they find the cookbook and then all of your other pieces? And you said you have a bi-weekly newsletter. Where's all of that?
Yes. So my website is amymccoy.com. And oddly enough, I do not sell my cookbook on my amymccoy.com website, but you can get it on Amazon. And I still, people do still email me and they're like, I still am using your book all the time. I'm like, that is fantastic. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And then my newsletter you can sign up for on amymccoy.com. You'll get a 15% discount on your, you know, so you get a little coupon code when you sign up. I just made it very generic on the site. So it's like, just sign up and get updates, but you'll still get a little coupon code. And then let's see, I'm in a few stores. I'm in Craftland in Providence. I'm in Turnstone Market in Nahant, Mass, and I'm in a little shop in Brooklyn. So the Brooklyn Women's Exchange. And so, yeah, I'm in a few little shops and then working on getting into some more.
And how about social media?
Oh, sorry. Social media. I'm Amy McCoy, AMYMCCOY on Instagram. And that's sort of my main social media that I use.
I love Instagram.
It's
my favorite. I like TikTok a lot. And there's a part of me that feels like, I should really think about, right? Because it's sort of the beginning of that wave and so many things I wished I was but I don't know. It feels like, I don't know, again, sort of, I'm sure practice would help, but it feels like the people who do it, so many people just do it so well.
I know. And Kate, I heard you talking about this on another podcast and I was like, oh, maybe I should spend more time on TikTok. So like I was early on Twitter, right? So I'm still on Twitter, but I'm more a lurker over there. And my Twitter is Tiny Farmhouse. But I'm like lurking and I'm lurking. I actually still have my Poor Girl Gourmet account over there and I'm just lurking. And I'm like, I should probably start using this again because I met so many great people on Twitter. I really did, like all sorts of people that, you know, in my producing life, people were like, you meet real friends online? I'm like, oh yeah, no, I have a lot of online friends who then I meet in real life. Yes, it's happened. Yes. But TikTok, actually, I'm really fascinated by, and I do have an account there. I just have done absolutely nothing yet. Yep, so same. I'm with you. Like, I think like there's a lot of potential there and a lot to learn. And I think I need to get on it. So
maybe if I keep talking about it and you keep hearing it, maybe both of us will.
I think we should do it.
Yeah.
I think we should do it. I do see a lot of people who I know who are using it and using it well. Yeah. So I think it's like, maybe just jump on in there. Dive on in.
Yeah. Well, that authenticity. Well, this has been amazing. I'm so excited to sort of continue to follow your journey and, see when you finally take that bigger leap into, having this be your one and only, if you will. And happy gardening season. I ordered my seeds. I know we had talked about that and I finally placed some seed order for cutting flowers and some herbs and all of the good stuff. So spring is on its way.
Awesome. Congratulations. I have some Snapdragon Snapdragon sprouts that have come up and some bee balm sprouts and in my indoor, obviously, seed starting and some sage. So that's all coming up. I'm excited. It's almost time to start the tomatoes. So
yes. Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Well, congratulations on your flowers.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here, Amy. This was wonderful.
Kate, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me.
This was such an eye-opening conversation for me in so many ways. I really enjoyed Amy's energy. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well, and I can't wait for you to go check out Amy's amazing designs. On to the takeaways from today's episode. Even if you're inclined towards something or naturally good at it, practice will help you be better. Don't give up. If you try to force something that doesn't feel right or doesn't feel like you probably won't be happy with the results. If you're looking to grow as a person, there will likely always be a gap between where you are now and where you would ideally like to be. That in between is where the growth happens. And people want to see and feel your joy. Find the things that bring you joy and find ways to share it with others. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of People, Place, and Purpose. Please remember to subscribe, rate, review, and leave a comment. As a new podcast, your support really means a lot. And if you know someone who might be inspired by this story, please share it with them. I would also love to engage with you directly, so please find us on Instagram at People, Place, Purpose. I'm so excited for us to continue to learn and grow and discover new things together, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, it's a beautiful day for an adventure. Get out there and explore.